It was more than just a plane. It was a speed incarnate and one of its kind. You see, Concorde was a needle-nosed marvel that flew twice the speed of sound and cut the Atlantic crossing down to 3 hours. It defied drag, and it made time zones irrelevant. And for a brief moment in history, it looked like the future of commercial air travel had arrived. By the 1970s, Concorde was the technological crown jewel of Anglo-French engineering, built by BAC and Aerospatiale, backed by governments, and celebrated worldwide. Only 20 were ever made, but each one was a masterpiece, one that showed that humans could outfly their limits. And yet, barely 3 decades later, the dream fell silent. Why did the Concorde die? Was it economics, the tragedy, or politics? Or was it a design too far ahead of its time? For years, aviation experts have debated the real cause behind the fall of the supersonic age. Today, we go beyond the headlines. Because behind the glamour and groundbreaking performance lay an uneasy truth. The very thing that made Concorde legendary also made it vulnerable. And it all begins with one question. What do you sacrifice when you push beyond the sound barrier? To understand what made Concorde extraordinary and ultimately unsustainable, we have to dissect the machine itself, its design, its power, and its bold defiance of commercial logic. Concorde wasn't just fast, it was a masterclass in accurate engineering. It was designed to cruise at Mach 2.04. It traveled at over 2,100 kilometers per hour at an altitude of 60,000 feet. That meant flying so high, passengers could see the curvature of the Earth. But to make this possible, engineers had to break aviation conventions. Let's start with the wings. Concorde's signature delta wing wasn't just for looks. It provided both lift and aerodynamic stability at supersonic speeds. But it also made takeoff and landing tricky, especially at low speeds. That's why Concorde needed a droop nose, a moving nose cone that lowered during takeoff and landing for better pilot visibility. Then there were the engines. The Rolls-Royce Sneakma Olympus 593 turbojet engines were descendants of military power plants, more rocket than airliner. With afterburners engaged, they gave the Concorde the thrust needed to push past Mach 2. But those engines came at a cost. They guzzled fuel, which can be about 25,000 liters per hour, and emitted a deafening roar, especially during takeoff. That's why many airports restricted their routes. That wasn't all. Its supersonic boom was too disruptive for land travel. Concorde could only go supersonic over oceans. Inside, things were equally unique. Despite its luxury image, Concorde's cabin was narrow, seating just 92 to 128 passengers. There were no lie-flat beds, no in-flight entertainment. This wasn't about comfort. It was about prestige and speed. Every inch of the Concorde was optimized for performance. But that obsession with speed and altitude came at a price. Efficiency, noise, and accessibility. And to top it off, the average ticket was around $12,000 in today's money. And while it thrilled the elite, it quietly left the rest of the aviation world behind. And yet, for all its brilliance, Concorde had one flaw. It couldn't outrun economics. Because no matter how fast you fly, you can't escape the cost. Concorde may have been a marvel of engineering, but from the very beginning, it was flying into a financial storm. The aircraft was developed under a joint treaty between the UK and France in 1962, but cost overruns quickly ballooned. The original budget was 70 million euros, but the final development cost was over 1.3 billion euros in today's money, and it was split between just 2 countries. The economics were brutal. Despite the ambition to sell hundreds of planes, only 20 Concordes were ever built. Just 14 flew commercially, 7 each for British Airways and Air France. The rest were test models or museum pieces. You are probably wondering why so few. Well, it's because airlines backed out en masse. The 1973 oil crisis sent fuel prices skyrocketing. And if you add the sonic boom limitations and political noise regulations, suddenly, this prestige project made no business sense for most carriers. And then there were the ticket prices. Concorde catered exclusively to the ultra-wealthy. A round trip from London to New York could cost upwards of $12,000 in today's money. Even at full capacity, the margins were razor thin. Ironically, British Airways and Air France made Concorde profitable only by treating it like a loss leader. British Airways, or BA, famously asked marketing consultants how much the business class passengers were willing to pay, and then charged them that, and more. But even the pricing couldn't save Concorde from the broader economic headwinds. Rising fuel costs, limited range, strict route regulations, and an aging airframe meant that the 1990s Concorde was increasingly a nostalgic luxury. It was somewhat of an icon without a future. But where money may have grounded Concorde eventually, it wasn't the economy that broke its wings. It was a tragedy. At 4:43 p.m. local time, Air France Flight 4590 began its takeoff roll. The destination was New York City, and on board were 100 passengers and 9 crew. But unknowing to them, within 2 minutes, all would be dead. As the Concorde accelerated down runway 26R, a strip of metal lay unseen on the tarmac. It had fallen minutes earlier from a Continental Airlines DC-10. Just 17 inches long, but what happened next rewrote aviation history. One of Concorde's tires burst. A chunk of rubber slammed into the underside of the wing, rupturing a fuel tank. Flames erupted instantly, engine 2 lost power, the plane veered left, and the nose lifted. But the aircraft was already doomed. Despite the crew's efforts, Concorde never gained enough altitude. Just 2 minutes after takeoff, it crashed into a hotel at Gonesse, a Paris suburb. All 113 people on board perished, along with the 4 people on the ground. It was the only fatal crash in Concorde's 27-year operational history, but for many, one was enough. The accident triggered an avalanche of scrutiny. Investigators from BEA, France's aviation authority, spent years reconstructing the sequence of events. The culprit? A titanium wear strip from another aircraft. It shouldn't have been on the runway, and Concorde's tires weren't designed to handle that kind of impact. But the truth ran deeper. The crash exposed vulnerabilities in the Concorde's 1960s-era design: thin-walled fuel tanks, lack of internal protection, and most of all, no precedent for this kind of tire burst. In the aftermath, both British Airways and Air France grounded their fleets. Modifications followed: Kevlar liners for fuel tanks, reinforced tires, and updated wiring. By November 2001, Concorde was back, but the magic was gone. Even before the crash, Concorde was on borrowed time. But what came after sealed its fate. After the crash of Flight 4590, the world's fastest passenger plane stood still. Both British Airways and Air France voluntarily grounded their fleets, not by order, but out of conscience. Engineers scrambled to understand what went wrong and how to make it right. And in order to make things right, modifications soon followed. Kevlar-lined fuel tanks were introduced to prevent future ruptures. Tires were redesigned to be stronger, multi-layered, and resistant to shattering on impact. Electrical systems were also upgraded to reduce the risk of onboard sparks during fuel leaks. And finally, in November 2001, Concorde returned to the skies. Its first post-crash commercial flight from London to New York was flown with both caution and ceremony. Celebrities, journalists, and loyal fans lined up to be part of its second act. But underneath the optimism, something had changed. The crash had shattered public confidence. Ticket sales slumped, and worse, the economics had only gotten tighter. The aircraft was expensive to run in its prime, but now insurance premiums have skyrocketed. Maintenance costs grew. Airport security, post 9/11, added new burdens. Concorde's elite clientele, once eager for the speed, became wary of the risk and the stigma. Air France retired its Concorde fleet first, in May 2003. British Airways followed soon after, announcing its last flight for October. Then came the final voyage. It wasn't just a retirement, it was a farewell to a future that never fully arrived. It was a ceremony, a eulogy in the sky. October 24th, 2003. The last time Concorde would ever pierce the stratosphere with passengers aboard. Flight BA002 from New York landed at Heathrow, where 2 other Concordes awaited. All 3 made their final descent, a choreographed goodbye. Inside the cabin was filled not with business tycoons or government officials, but enthusiasts, celebrities, and those desperate to ride supersonic one last time. The crew wore commemorative pins. The air was reverent, as if attending a funeral in the sky. Concorde touched down at 4:05 p.m. Crowds erupted in applause. Fire engines sprayed arches of water across the runway, a tradition reserved for retirements and heroes. The final touchdown marked more than an end of an aircraft. It was the closing chapter of a bold dream that speed, style, and engineering brilliance could rewrite the rules of time and distance. But why did we let it end? Why did the most advanced passenger jet in history, one that could chase the sunrise, disappear while slower, clunkier jets kept flying? To understand Concorde's demise is to confront the brutal economics of aviation and the limits of ambition in a world that wanted more for less. Concorde didn't crash into irrelevance. It was grounded slowly, deliberately by a web of politics, economics, and evolving priorities. On paper, it was everything aviation promised: faster than sound travel, record-breaking altitude, elite engineering. But that excellence came at a cost few were willing to pay. It guzzled fuel like a rocket, needed excessive maintenance, and required a runway's worth of technical support. A one-way ticket could cost $10,000. Even with prestige, profitability was always on the edge of collapse. Then there were the politics. Concorde was banned from flying overland in the United States due to its sonic boom, effectively slashing its global market. Noise regulations in major cities squeezed its routes. Environmental lobbyists branded it a relic of the fuel-hungry past. And then, the final blow. On July 25, 2000, Air France Flight 4590 crashed shortly after takeoff. A titanium strip from a Continental DC-10 shredded a tire, sending rubber into a fuel tank. Concorde, for the first time, was no longer invincible. The crash killed 113 people, the only fatal incident in Concorde's entire operational history. But it shattered public confidence, even though the fault lay with debris, not the aircraft design. Concorde was grounded over a year. Modifications were made, flights resumed, but the magic had been punctured. In the end, it was a perfect storm. Aging airframes, shrinking demand, rising insurance premiums, environmental pressure, and an industry chasing efficiency over elegance. Concorde was a marvel, but it didn't scale. The future had moved on. And yet, for all the reasons it ended, the world hasn't let Concorde go, because what it represented, speed, style, and audacity, would have changed aerospace today. But I am pretty sure that the dream isn't dead. It's just looking for a second takeoff. When Concorde flew its final journey in 2003, it didn't vanish from the world's imagination. It became a ghost, haunting innovation labs, boardrooms, and hangars across the aerospace world. Because Concorde wasn't just a plane, it was a question. Why did we stop flying this fast? In the 2 decades since, a new wave of aviation startups and national agencies has quietly been working on Concorde's spiritual successors. The goal is supersonic flight, minus the noise, minus the fuel waste, and this time, for more than just the wealthy few. Boom Supersonic's Overture promises Mach 1.7 over water routes, using 100% sustainable aviation fuel. NASA's X-59 aims to virtually eliminate the sonic boom, unlocking potential for overland supersonic travel. And private firms like Spike are designing business jets that could slash transatlantic flights in half. This is not nostalgia, it's strategic. As space travel accelerates and time becomes the new luxury, governments and investors are betting that supersonic mobility will return, cleaner, quieter, and more inclusive. But Concorde's legacy isn't just technical, it's cultural. It forced engineers to dream beyond constraints. It showed the world that the sky wasn't the limit. And even now, as Supersonic 2.0 slowly ascends, its silhouette lingers, elegant, aerodynamic, and utterly unforgettable. Concorde changed aviation, even in its absence. And as the next generation of high-speed aircraft prepares for liftoff, one thing is clear: the dream never died. It just took a long taxi back to the runway. Let's recognize the one that soared through political turbulence, technological limits, and public awe. The one that dazzled and defied until the world changed around it. And when it fell not from failure, but from the weight of being too far ahead, too soon. Now, there is one question that Concorde left behind. Can we go faster? Or will we dare to try again? Well, we can never tell, but for now, if this flight through history changed how you see the skies, hit subscribe, ring that bell, and keep your seatbelt fastened. We're just getting started.